Hello everyone and welcome to our AgTrace webinar. It's good to have you with us. My name's David Lamb. I'm the Chief Scientist of Food Agility Cooperative Research Centre, and we, the CRC, are working in partnership with the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry on the AgTrace initiative. So I'll be your MC for the next hour and a bit. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners of the many lands and waters on which we all live and work. I'd like to pay respect to the elders of all of these lands and waters, both past, present and emerging. Okay, the aim of this webinar is to provide you all with an update on our AgTrace initiative, which, as I said before, is being undertaken in partnership with the Commonwealth through DAF and selected industry participants. Now, before we kick this out the gates, just a little bit of housekeeping for you all. Firstly, and most importantly, we do welcome questions, and please use the Q&A tab, not the chat tab, but the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Now, whilst it's not possible for you to ask the questions directly yourself, if you pop them in the Q&A chat tab, then we'll be able to work through those that are posted with the presenter on your behalf as an interactive conversation on the completion of the presentations. So now to the webinar. Today, we have presentations from a number of key people from a number of important stakeholder groups, some of which who are working directly with us on the AgTrace initiative, and others key to industry who are similarly leaning into the challenge of the day, which is in relation to the EU deforestation regulation as a case in point for lifetime product traceability and incentivised permissions-based data sharing, all as a key to enabling market access. Now, to open our program, I'd like to introduce to you Kieran McDonald, Assistant Secretary, Agriculture Traceability in DAF, to set the scene. Thank you, Kieran.
Thanks, David, and good afternoon, everyone on the East Coast of Australia, and hello to everyone, whatever part of the world you're in. Trust everyone can hear me okay. Yes, so David said, Kieran McDonald, I'm the Assistant Secretary of the Agricultural Traceability Branch here in DAF in Canberra. It's great everyone can be a part of today's discussions. Before we go into the content today, I'd just like to briefly provide some context on the National Agricultural Traceability Strategy and how it links to the AgTrace work and why we invested in it. Just pop to the next slide. So the National Agricultural Traceability Strategy was developed through a co-design process from 2022 to 2023 with a wide range of agricultural supply chain stakeholders. So I have the strategy here. It's on the DAF website. Well worth a look at. So the strategy aims to align and maintain momentum around a common vision for an enhanced national agricultural traceability ecosystem. The strategy focuses on a whole of agriculture supply chain and supports agricultural products and value-adding benefits domestically and internationally. So our vision, and this is a shared vision for the future of the ag traceability, is industry, governments and other agriculture supply chains participants have adopted, aligned and interoperable world-class traceability systems that are fit for purpose, efficient and dynamic to accelerate Australian exports and enhance biosecurity and food safety in a sustainable way. One way that the strategy seeks to achieve this is by calling out some pressing challenges and aligning them to priority areas for action. There are two challenges in the strategy of particular relevance to the work being undertaken by Food Agility. They are challenge one, alignment of frameworks and data standards to maximize traceability system innovation, security and interoperability, including streamlined regulation. And challenge three, increase traceability value add while ensuring benefits are distributed across the supply chain to sustain and expand market access and protect and enable agriculture exports, biosecurity and other benefits. Just pop to the last slide. So the AgTrace project was an investment between government and industry to form a defining traceability partnership, supporting delivery of the industry-led traceability strategy. The project has three clear streams of work, and you will see on the screen how these align with the challenges that I was just referring to. So establishment of a national data standards working group to seek agreement on data sharing standards, interoperability and data management practices. This project's aligned with the outcomes of challenge one. So proof of concepts in the red meat, horticulture and grains industries to develop and test innovative solutions for secure and consent-based traceability data capture and management. So this project is aligned with the outcomes of Challenge 2 and a cost-benefit analysis of the projects to support cross-commodity industry uptake of enhanced traceability systems. So that's aligned with both Challenges 1 and 2. So I'll leave it to Food Agility to explain in more detail what they've been working on and an update on where things are up to. However, I hope you'll remember how this work is contributing to the bigger picture in agriculture traceability, helping to address challenges in the secure collection and use of data for trade and market access. Thanks for the opportunity, David. Over to you.
Thank you, Kieran. And a reminder, everyone, if you do have any questions about that high-level strategy and the placement of the initiative, please pop them in the Q&A tab, and we can come back to them at the conclusion of the presentations. Thank you, Kieran. Our next presenter is Simon Winter, who is working as part of the AgTrace initiative team. And Simon will provide some context and background to the AgTrace initiative and how we're working to address the EUDR challenge. Over to you, Simon.
Right, thanks very much, David, and good afternoon, everyone. Next slide, please. I'm here to talk about AgTrace, I guess the concept and where we're at. So fundamentally, AgTrace is about managing risks for Australian agriculture through enhanced traceability and actually being able to link information to products going through supply chains. AgTrace is about addressing the increasing number of challenges that are coming at Australian agriculture in terms of market access, biosecurity, ESG, provenance, and any other challenge. It's very much focused on being industry-led, but also regulator-ready. And from that perspective, it's about minimising government interaction, for example, only capturing data once. Importantly, and I think this is where the value proposition of AgTrace really sits, it's about an approach that is scalable, interoperable, and simple, so it can add or remove issues as they ebb and flow. And also interoperability is a huge challenge for any supply chain. If you think of a typical agricultural supply chain, every operator in that supply chain, whether you're one of 40,000 producers, whether you're a sale yard, a feedlot, an abattoir, an exporter, or whatever, you all operate your own system. And none of those systems can actually talk to each other unless they're specifically built to do so. This AgTrace is able to address that issue in a relatively simple way. AgTrace is all about empowering producers also through applying permissions to who has access to your information. It is low cost, and as sort of alluded to, it's also system agnostic. So what we've done, and next slide please, is basically built what we've called the Australian Agricultural Traceability Protocol. So it's protocol over platform. It's not about platforms, it's about protocols. You adopt a protocol, you then comply and are able to interact, interoperate. It's fundamentally a trust architecture for Australian agricultural produce, and it's able to link information to products. And it does this through three main attributes. The first is called a verifiable credential. And this is a way of sharing data that is totally tamper-proof and not reliant on any centralised system, although it can work with those systems. It also uses distributed identifiers. These are ways to verify the identity of a person, place, or thing that is operating in a supply chain. And the third attribute is a trust anchor. And these are basically entities that have authority to verify a claim being made about a product. And I guess the other point to make here is that this is not just something we've developed. Next slide. It's actually based on a series of global standards. The AATP, as we've called it, is really the Australian subset of the United Nations Transparency Protocol, which is a global initiative to basically develop this sort of approach. So we're very closely aligned with that. It's also built on sustainability standards and also IT standards such as GS1 and W3C. So if we go to the next slide now, the conceptual framework by which we operate is painted here. If you think of the left-hand side here, the rich and private data, represents each of those operators in a supply chain. So it's based on a company's rich and confidential information, which could be stored in any way. It could be a pocketbook, it could be a spreadsheet, it could be a database, it could be a complete IT system. And then if you want to make a claim about your product, you then need to provide that information to some sort of competent authority who could then issue some sort of what we call a light credential, which reflects that product is compliant against that attribute. You also have other activities such as business events, and that could be a sale, it could be a product movement or whatever. And again, you can generate a credential, a digital credential, to reflect that has occurred. All these credentials sit in what we call a digital product passport, which then travels with the product. And the example that you can see here, I've actually used myself as the product. If I wanted to go travelling, I basically went to my competent authority and said I need to demonstrate that I have had my COVID vaccinations. That competent authority being the Australian government, they then issued me with a digital credential, which you can see there. And basically that credential has basic details of who I am. It has a big tick to say, yes, I've had my vaccinations. And it also has a link, it's a bit hard to read, but a link to a document. That document is where all the detailed, rich data sits, but you can't actually access it. All you can see is that, yes, I comply. If you want to access the detailed information, you'd have to come back through me and I would have to grant you permission to use it. And the same with a business event such as a movement. In this case, I wanted to move from Sydney to Brisbane. Qantas issued me with a light credential, which says, yes, you can move from Sydney to Brisbane. And it gives basic information and a link to the more detailed information. That all sits in my product passport and then travels forward with me. If I were a box of meat or any other agricultural commodity going overseas, I would have some sort of identifier applied to me, whether that be a barcode, a QR code, an EID or whatever. And that would then provide the link back to my digital product passport. Okay, next slide. So what I'd like to talk about now is AgTrace, the project. So as Kieran identified, DAF has provided funding for the CRC to undertake a project in this space. And what it's about is data-enabled traceability of agricultural commodities. We're undertaking 3 proof of concepts, one in cattle, one in horticulture, and one in grains. And the first proof of concept focused very much on the EU deforestation regulation and was completed in December 23. Following the success of the first proof of concept, we're now proposing to extend a pilot project to demonstrate commercial compliance with the EUDR. Thanks. Next slide. So fundamentally, we're trying to solve how do you empower those in the supply chain to verify and share their deforestation status? How do you confirm whole-of-life traceability for beef and hides? And how do you link all that information to the products? The purpose being to minimise the risks to Australian beef and hide industries. So it's about risk management for the Australian industry. That's what the project is about. So drawing on what we've learned from the first proof of concept, next slide, please. These are some of the lessons we've learned. The first one is in relation to location and creating a land management credential. We've identified that you need to have a geospatial linking to the property boundaries to accurately assess for deforestation, which makes sense. Unfortunately, that throws a challenge up in terms of PIC registers because they don't always, PICs don't always reflect the actual property itself. However, there is a joint MLA-CBO project, which is part of the AgTrace team, that's already developed a way of addressing this through the Australian feed-based monitor, and that'll be spoken more about shortly. The system has the cadastral geospatial boundary data already embedded in it right across Australia, so that problem's already been solved. It also has functionality to add and remove contiguous and non-contiguous parcels of land into a single PIC, so that addresses all the differences between state and territory requirements. and it's accessed through a producer's My MLA account. So it's already building on existing systems, which is consistent with Cattle Australia's draft policy position. In terms of the Australian side due diligence, we can already simply generate a credential around deforestation using producers' My MLA accounts to complete the EUDR assessment. So we can already do that. What we can't do is see the location history of cattle. And that's something that NLIS could possibly offer that functionality. Next slide. So this pilot project we're looking at is really focusing on risk management on the Australian side and taking a consignment of beef, doing the due diligence in terms of deforestation, etc., and then providing that to the exporter. The project will then provide that information, well, the exporter will provide that information to the importer in the EU as part, which would then feed into their due diligence statement. So what it looks like, and I should at this next slide, I should acknowledge the involvement of Tees Australia, who have agreed to join us in this pilot project. What will be happening is that Tees will be providing relevant information to the AATP competent authority, in this case CB Labs, who will then assess properties and generate a deforestation credential and provide that credential back to Tees. Tees will also engage the NLIS database to confirm whole of life traceability, and that then feeds into their due diligence information, which goes forward with the product. The product will be exported, and the importer will then work with their competent authority in the EU to verify that that data actually reflects what is needed. And so finally, how it all comes together, next slide, is that AgTrace, we're developing the system that I've just outlined that looks very much around risk management and identifying spatial picks, credential generation, and can be used at a small scale. ISC is also working on its minimum viable product, which is focusing on the EID pick history and immediate, and can provide industry-wide scale for this, and that's for the 3,500, 4,000 UCAS accredited producers currently in Australia. We're also at the same time looking at hides, and the challenge there is greater because it's a bigger pool from which hides are coming from that go to the EU, and that's something that we're still scoping out. Dave, I'm happy to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. So you've heard we have a protocol in place, the Grain Agriculture Traceability Protocol, a decentralized trust architecture, and the notion of a mechanism to point to credentials, light credentials, as part of a kind of a digital product wallet. Now, a key enabler in meeting EUDR requirements, as Simon said, is to arm Australian exporters with the best possible suite of evidence of producer compliance. The ultimate aim here being to help exporters manage risk associated with assembling consignments for export. So our next presenter, Phil Tickle from CB Labs, is working with the AgTrace team on further experimentation around the creation and checking of such credentials for our exporters. Over to you, Phil.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks everyone for being here today. So Simon's given you a little bit of background on the experiments and the original proof of concepts, and what I'm going to do here is give you a little bit of a whirlwind tour of what that means in real life in terms of the issues that we're addressing to drive the pilot project, knowing that we've got EUDR compliance bearing down on the entire industry, and we've got to solve the solution, and we've got to solve the problem, we've got to do it quickly. So next slide. Now, what I wanted to do here, I'm going to dive into all of the complexities around imagery and other things in a minute, but I just wanted to call out at the start that there's quite a lot of apparent confusion around how we actually communicate the location of picks, and there's already definitions within the EUDR. It talks about a plot of land, and it talks about a plot of land that enjoys sufficiently homogeneous conditions to allow an evaluation of aggregate level risk of deforestation and forest degradation, etc. And you don't have to think very long to recognise that that we're not 4 hectare farms in Australia. We're 40,000, 400,000 hectare farms. And really that wasn't what the property identification code or the PIC register was designed to do. And I suppose an example there with the little map on the bottom left there, we've got the land parcel data for an area in Queensland. We've got the individual property names in this case here, so we know where they are. We know where the front gate is for that particular property in the red. And there really is no other way to fairly represent that farm than explicitly analysing the entire spatial boundary of that farm, and also noting that that farm actually has non-contiguous land parcels associated with it as well. So you also can't just create a simple computed centroid without landing. In this particular case, you're actually landing on the wrong farm. So you've got to deal with this in a spatially explicit way. And this is really the approach that we took with the Australian Feed-Based Monitor, which is a $4.7 million partnership between SIBO Labs, MLA, and Integrity Systems Company. So I'm just going to walk you through that now. So next slide, Molly. So this is I suppose, a snapshot here as well. So we do have some of these problems already solved. The Australian Feed-Based Monitor, you can come in through MyMLA, you can be authenticated, you can link up your LPA accounts to your MyMLA accounts, and you can create a spatial PIC. It's already underpinning the environmental credentials for grass-fed beef platform. And importantly, it also allows the producer to own and control access to their data as part of this process as well. So that's critical. And it's often a topic that's talked about in terms of privacy. We solve that by the producer opting into the process. Next slide. So here's an example here. The user comes in, they get authenticated, they verify their address, they verify their front gate, which may not actually be the same as their address. We already know that some properties have their addresses as the post office in Roma or the post office in George Street in Sydney. So we solve that by giving them the ability to put in their address as well as their explicit front gate location. And then they can select their land parcels, and importantly, those land parcels link back to their land title and their ownership. So we've solved that problem as well to be able to audit and verify, the legal entity that actually is driving that, that owns that farm. We've got the ability to create multiple farms against PICs as well. So often people have, 1 to 10 or more farms on a single PIC. We can simply solve that problem by a user adding additional farms to that PIC, and that's critical for that variable environmental credentials that are often attached to across farms that might have been purchased for over years to decades. And we've also got the ability to share that information. So the user, I should say, has the information, the ability to share that data whoever they want to share it with in the supply chain, and they also have the ability to revoke that access as well at any time. Next slide, Molly. So, and we've also got a framework there in terms of the ability to generate reports. So we're talking about credentials here today. We've already got that mechanism to a degree within the Australian Feed-Based Monitor. We already do things around deforestation, but there are limits to what we can do in that space, particularly within this area. So this is really a simple way of giving a producer access to quite complex data, but we've got to go much further than that with that in terms of EUDR or any sort of compliance or credential system that was really underpinning markets. Next slide. So here's an example here. We've got the whole of Australia here. We actually monitor every farm in Australia on a weekly to seasonally or annual basis. Next slide. And we're giving users access to existing nationally consistent vegetation data. So in this case here, it's the National Greenhouse Gas Inventory data, but there are quite significant limitations to that data set. So it's served a purpose, but it's also we're getting to the point now where it's really not meeting the business needs of some of these new credential systems that are coming forward, but it does still serve a purpose. Next slide. So what we're doing as part of this pilot, Simon talked about the experiments, and we're now going to a pilot phase. We are building out an AgTrace platform, to provide those various actors in the supply chain with the ability to generate, request credentials, verify credentials, and then pass those credentials down the supply chain. So this is sort of what the system looks like. Next slide. We've embedded the spatial pick concept into the system, consistent with the Australian feed-based monitor. And importantly, as part of that process as well, when someone accepts and creates an account within the feed-based monitor right now, they are accepting terms and conditions which state that that information is shared with Integrity Systems Company, but only for the purposes of industry reporting. So in an aggregate form. So we've got some work to do to increase the I suppose the permissions there for producers to start to differentiate exactly what specific sort of component they actually want to share their data for, and we're obviously going to be working on that as well as part of this process. But we've got here the land parcels, we've got the addresses, but that problem is solved. Next slide. So what users will do once they've onboarded themselves, they can simply request a deforestation credential. In this case here, there could be other credentials coming forward, but in this case it's an EUDR request. So they hit the button and they make a request, and then there'll be well, there already is a large amount of automation, but there's also going to be some manual processes in place as well. So this is a way of logging that request and progressing it into the system. Next slide. So the deforestation assessment process is critical, and we've got people's businesses on the line here, and we've got to ensure that we get this right. And so we've got a range of I suppose hierarchical processes that we're looking at and are already doing in some cases. We've got regional deforestation risk assessments that we've been doing for quite some time for a number of actors, and a number of those are actually on the call at the moment. We are setting up a process to systematically undertake the deforestation assessments themselves. And critically, we're doing that through multiple lines of evidence and a sitting process. There is no single data set that actually solves that is entirely fit for purpose, and it solves the problem we're looking at in here. So we've got to use a pragmatic approach to take multiple lines of evidence and bring them together to solve the problem we've got. We've also got definitions around here, and we're talking a lot about EU definitions, which is 5 metres high, 10% canopy cover, or Australian definitions of forest, which is 2 metres high and 20% canopy cover. We get bound up in that a lot, and I suppose what I would say here now is we can deal with that issue and move on and look at multiple definitions at any time. We've also got the need to get humans involved in the process as well to ensure that we're doing we've got a high quality of credential being developed. We've got to notify producers when this is an opt-in process. So when we do find something on a property, we've got to have the ability to notify the producer and let them tell their story, particularly when there's other processes in train, whether it be fires or in fact clearing permits. And then obviously communication processes have got to be defined as well. Next slide. So this is a few examples here. This is sort of the high level risk assessments that we've been doing for 5 years now, postcode risk assessments, being able to for an individual processor or a retailer to identify where the animals are coming from at a postcode level and identify the risk at that postcode level. So the grey dots are saying there's minimal risk or no, or I'm going to say no risk, minimal risk deforestation in that particular area at that time. And the red areas are places that have historically seen a high level of deforestation or forest loss. So it allows you to prioritise where you need to put more effort in. Next slide. We've also got other data sets coming out of the pipeline. So this is part of the Global Forest Monitoring Initiative, the EUDR, the World Resources Institute, the Joint Remote Sensing Centre. They are all looking at Australia and globally as well, and generating highly automated products for the marketplace and for the regulations. We've also got, I think I saw Vanessa on the line there. Organisations like WWF are building out solutions as well. And critically, we want to ensure that we're using all of that best available data to drive this process. Next slide. So what I want to do is walk you through an example here of what it looks like in real life. So we've picked up an area near Roma in central Queensland, and typically those areas that are brigalow country or mulga country are the areas that are generally most contested at the moment. So we've got Roma down the bottom there and there in the middle. Next slide. SIBO Labs, we have our own woody vegetation density data set that we generate on a continuous basis. So this is not looking at the specific definitions; it's looking at the broader density, because we need to know what's nearly forest or nearly woodland. So we've got some tools here that we can say identify the areas that are nearly Australian forests or nearly FAO forests, and we do it through having a continuous woody vegetation data set. Next slide. We've then got the NIGI, the National Greenhouse Inventory data. That's my thing's blocking me here at the top of the slide here, Molly. So hopefully I can remember what this slide, the data sets are. So this is the National Greenhouse Accounting Inventory data. The purple areas are those areas that are defined as forest loss in that change period, which is 2021. Of primary forest that's never been removed before. The yellow and orange areas are areas that are basically regrowth loss. Next slide. We've then got slats. It's obviously talked about a lot, and so this is the most recent slats data, 2021, and you can see here it starts to get a little bit scary when we've got a lot of apparent change across the landscape. Doesn't mean it's all illegal, just means that there's been change identified in the landscape. And loss, and it's also not necessarily forest either. It can be any native vegetation being picked up by the slats team. Next slide. Another scary one here. This is the Opera Earth Observatory data, and any area in red there is being identified as an area that's got greater than 50% probability of being real loss, and the yellow areas are relatively high probability as well. Gets a bit scary that we're seeing a lot of red on that map there, but again, there's ways of dealing with that. So that is not all forest. It can be a whole range of things that we're looking at here that we've got to sieve through the process. And any risk assessment that's doing this work, if you don't do that sieving process, you're going to be setting up a whole bunch of producers to fail right from day one. Next slide. So when we just stack all those things together, so we've now got all of those the current products we're using in here that are identifying change, and there are others that we want to bring into the system as well. But I'm just going to zoom into that area to the northwest there. I'll just want to the next slide. So what I've done here now as well is actually mask those areas that, in the case of the EUDR, we have a smaller geography. So we know those areas that are nearly 5 meters high and 10% canopy cover. In this case here, we've masked all those areas out that are not relevant to the question. And you can see there in the top right there, we've got some areas that we need to have a bit more of a look at. So next slide. So I've just zoomed in there, and you can see here on the bottom left, we've got some significant change, and on the top right, we've got some significant change as well. We've also got some farm boundaries in there. This is all publicly available data as well. So there's no secrets here. All of the data I'm showing you here is publicly available. And then, now the next question is, what is the change that's occurring there? So just go to the next slide. So we can bring in our own data here as well. So this is using the 2020 baseline, and we can identify that there's in 2020 that was what the landscape looked like in terms of those areas that meet the FAO definition. We go to the next slide. And then you can see there in May 2024, so only a month ago, the area to the bottom right, there has been some change there. It's a bit hard to see in the slides here, but it's very likely to be fire. And on the right-hand side there, we've got clearly some change, and as an experienced image interpreter, you can identify that as well as you can process that automatically. But importantly, we need to be able to visually interpret that as well. So we've got an example here where there's likely forest removal. Go to the next slide. So what I've done here is zoom in. So the next step is to zoom in. On the top there, we've got 2 dates of high resolution imagery, sub-meter resolution imagery. One dating back to about 2020. The other one is about nearly a year ago now. But you can see there in that period of time that area that was changing there. You can start to see pull lines in the vegetation that we're looking at. On the bottom there, we've got our more near real-time data with our Sentinel 10-metre resolution data, and we can see in that between the baseline period and as of about a month ago, there is obviously change. Next question is, what is the change, and how do you attribute that change? Next slide. It just so happens that this property has a PMAP associated with it. So in the case of Queensland, there's regulated vegetation, and so what we have identified that yes, there has been a loss. Yes, it is potentially a fail if you look at the EUDR definitions explicitly, but there's also room in there in terms of the compliance to local regulations as well. In this case here, that vegetation that's been removed there has a Category X mapping against it, and in this case, it's very likely that that producer has the right to remove that vegetation under the state regulations. And this is an opportunity here for us to provide that notification to the producer, to let them know, and for them to provide the PMAF information, any other information back to support their accreditation or certification. But also, this data here is also publicly available. Next slide. It's often not quite as easy as that. So we get all of that red and orange that was splashed across the screen. We've got more examples here. This is north of Carnarvon, I'm showing here at the moment, and we've got red all over the map. And if you look at the top right there, and I've got some very recent Sentinel imagery, and you can clearly see that the European Union is mapping change on permanent cropping areas, which is problematic. But again, we've got ways of dealing with that. So we can mask out on the bottom right there. We've masked out those cropping areas, and then we're just left with the forested area to the east there. That's state forest and national park. And again, whether it's fires or mechanical harvesting, we're not sure, but we can very quickly discount a large proportion of the grazing land. But I suppose what we're talking about here is that we've got to have, and we must have interpreters in this process, and we must have the producers involved in the verification attribution process to get this mechanism to work, if we really want to be working on behalf of the producer and acting in their best interests. Next slide. So once we've walked through that process, we've detected the change, we've quantified the change, we've verified the change. We then have the ability to notify the user, and this is a capability that we built out in POC1 to be able to generate the evidence that's needed, and then notify the producer, and then set up a process to resolve that. And I suppose there is a question here: when there is a resolution process that is required, who is actually going to be doing that when the credentials potentially start to get contested in any way? And also, we've got in this case here, we've got a deforestation-free assessment, which is all good to go, and we can meet that credential and move it into the supply chain. Next slide. So this is what this sort of credential looks like. It turns into a digital passport that Simon described. We've got the ability in the future developments to attach those credentials to individual animal RFIDs as part of an animal movement or animal consignment system that we're working through at the moment. And we've also got the ability to share those credentials directly against the PIC. And this is really what we're talking about right now. We need to get 3,360 odd farms onto the system. Currently, the Australian feed-based model has 3,800 and something farms, covering 100 million hectares already on the system. So there's a fair chance that a lot of those farms that have already opted into the Australian feed-based model are UCAS accredited. So there's a fair chance we don't have to do all of them. Probably a lot of them are already there. Next slide. So what we're doing with teas, Simon mentioned that we're doing an experiment with teas. We've got sort of two levels of experiments. We've got those relating to a process, directly with a processor, which is what we're working on with teas at the moment. And then we've also got, I suppose, the model around the rest of the industry in terms of how we interact with all of those other mixed supply chains that aren't disclosed. And I suppose some very positive news here is that teas have we've developed a method to create a credential at a PIC level and develop an API against that credential. and just recently Tees tested that relative to their what they have access to under NLIS, and we were able to, or they were able to generate a whole of life list of the PICs associated with an individual animal RFID, and for SIBO Labs to be able to then send them a status of deforestation free or not against that PIC. So that's very, very promising that we've been able to do that, and that's thanks to Integrity Systems Company having the ability to do that in the first place. So it's great. So we really have made a big leap in terms of sort of an understanding the capability here, and this within the last few weeks. Next slide. So we've got a whole range of others. So that's directly from a breeder straight to a processor. It was obviously a relatively simple use case. We've got multiple other experiments that are running with Tees to look at these mixed scenarios of animal movements and consignments across the landscape. Next slide. So I suppose just to finish up in here, this is really where we're at the moment. We're leveraging off the capabilities and ensuring that we don't duplicate any effort. That's critical from our perspective. And in terms of where we're aiming to land, to be able to generate consignments sort of before or credentials against consignments before they leave the farm, to facilitate the transfer of that data to NLIS in terms of the credential, to be able to facilitate the transfer of the credentials and the digital product passports against each consignment, and also to fully enable the AATP. So we're rapidly moving into a very realistic solution for the problem we've got at the moment. But I suppose just two last points there. Absolutely critical that we empower and control the producers in this process, and also we've got a big investment already in place with the strain feed-based monitor, and we've got an enormous opportunity to leverage off that spatial PIC capability. And if we don't, we really won't we'll be entering into some territory that really doesn't give the individual producer comfort in terms of being able to report credibly against their deforestation status. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Phil. And so you can all see that there is a spectrum of effort with a spectrum of complexity around how we can meet this challenge and opportunities around the EUDR. Now, of course, a key industry stakeholder in all of this is MLA and Integrity Systems Company. And ultimately, lifetime traceability is an assumed given under the requirements of EUDR. Now, the ISC is leaning into the issue of whole of lifetime traceability and whole of industry enablement, and some of the key opportunities associated with the NLIS. So I'd now like to introduce Elizabeth Bradley from the ISC, supported by Natasha Terrio, to offer their perspectives. Over to you.
Thanks, Dave. So we are, as Dave mentioned, working on with industry and a working group as a solution, a minimum viable product or something that's going to facilitate trade in the short term, that's going to be low impact on the producer base and facilitate the exports continued to the EU, not just for the meat side, but also for the leather, given that they can come from any property, not just UKES accredited ones. So we started a working group a few months ago to look at how we can provide some sort of solution using the integrity systems that we have, so NLIS and LPA. We have an aim to look at a minimum viable product, so something that's going to be able to provide exporters with the geolocations and some sort of validation around deforestation. We don't have answers to questions or a firm solution just yet. We're still working through lots of challenges. So effectively, we do have the life history of animals in NLIS. Processors currently don't have that function or report available to them. So what we would envision is that they have the list of devices and they're able to search them and return geolocations that meet that deforestation check to limit the amount of data and sharing going on. We're still trying to overcome issues with data sharing and whether or not geolocations and how we can share those throughout the supply chain. We're looking at a range of options at the moment. We're also looking at the geolocation issue, and looking at different avenues about how we might tackle that. So within LPA, we have physical property addresses of the LPA accredited producer base, and looking at if we can translate those into GPS points. A single point to start with, obviously, the polygon or the spatial data is obviously the best practice and the gold standard, but at the short term, a minimum product, maybe it's just a single point. We're also looking at how we could ingest other sources of geolocation data, so engagement with the states and territories and trying to source if they are able to share other information. Again, there's data privacy and data sharing issues with that avenue as well. The other option, obviously, or the other issue that we're looking at is how we actually return that deforestation validation back to the exporter, so that both meat exporters and leather exporters can do that check and share that information with their importer as required by the regulation. So we're working hard to try and overcome the data sharing issue of the geolocation as well as the geolocation issue, and how we integrate with the deforestation check as well. And it is looked at as a short term, while we look at a longer term solution, given we've got 6 months until the regulation takes effect. So we're still in concept and solutioning stages, and we're looking at how we can improve data quality across LPA to try and facilitate some of the geolocation issues as well. But yeah, the aim is to try and help both the meat exporters and the leather exporters in the interim, which is what the industry working group was formed to do. So I know it's a brief overview of what we're doing, but we're still kind of working through how we can integrate and develop something, and also working with food agility as well. So that's for me. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Natasha, just a quick check. Any comments you wanted to throw in the mix?
Yeah, I think the real thing is that a lot of what the effort that Elizabeth and the working group have put forward is going to still require quite a bit of commitment from industry to get it over the line. We've got a number of stop-go points that will be coming up shortly that we're going to need the support on, because if we don't get the support of industry around some of these discussions of sharing lifetime data and being able to do it by maintaining the privacy of the producers but being able to validate the data, we won't be able to move forward. So we're hoping that the industry and everyone are quite happy to collaborate with us to get this across the line.
Thank you, Natasha. Just on that point, are you able to share any initial, I guess, tactics around the line? I mean, is it the kind of thing that permission could be offered up in advance, you know, through the LPA mechanism, or do you have a sense that it may require an extra layer of approval? Just some early thinking. Any early thoughts?
Look, we've been working with legal and in line with the privacy requirements, and obviously we have disclosure requirements out of LPA. And there's also disclosure kind of requirements in NLIS. So LPA, we could look to capture it as a full disclosure across the program. We could look to seek individual producers to log in and kind of grant that permission to share. So we're looking at both avenues. One's obviously going to take a lot longer and require producers to log on and do something, versus if we had a blanket approach, it's more of a notification style system. So we're chasing down all avenues at this point in time to see what's gonna be the most appropriate.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Just a reminder to everyone, if you do have any questions, feel free to pop it in the Q&A tab at the bottom. We've had a couple come in, and some of them have been mopped up literally live through the presentation. So thank you for those, and a couple of them I've just been chatting with you backwards and forwards to get a sense of what it is you're after. There is one enduring question around if you like, the criticality of lifetime traceability in the whole process. Simon, what's your take on this? How critical is the lifetime traceability in this process, and the role of the sort of credentialing and passport mechanism along the way?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I guess parking current arrangements in terms of AgTrace, it's a new initiative. It's something that is still developing. 12 months ago, it wasn't even born. So it's still evolving. But the bottom line is that we can actually tailor it to whatever the needs of industry are. It's industry-led, and industry need to tell us what they want. So in terms of lifetime traceability, it's a requirement to export to the EU. And it's going to be a requirement of the EUDR as well, in terms of because the animals must have resided on properties deforestation that have not been deforested for their whole life. So going back to the example I used of the COVID vaccination credential, that credential didn't tell whoever received it what doctors I visited or what types of vaccinations I had. It just said, yes, I've met the requirements as of a particular date. So theoretically, AgTrace could do something similar. Now, the only limitation to that, of course, is that there would need to be some sort of audit function, and so you would need to have business rules around that. But from a I guess a traceability or verification perspective, you can deal. Credentials have the flexibility to be able to deal with it in that sort of manner. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Simon. Question, I think, for you, Phil, if I may. Just a little bit around the current criteria you're using as part of your experimentation for the, if you like, the deforestation-free credential. You mentioned, if you like, multiple approaches and the notion of sieving. Could you tell us a little bit more about the current criteria you're working with? You did have them on the slides, but maybe just spend a couple of minutes just reminding us of the detail of those.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. There's obviously the pure definition. Obviously the pure definition in terms of forest, forest. So FAO being 5 metres and 10% canopy cover, and the Australian definition being 2 metres and 20% canopy cover. And we're probably happy to talk to anyone about that. I was involved with the definition of forest in Australia back in the 90s, so I've done a bit on it. So we're using that. We're also using protected areas data as well, land tenure data. So you can very quickly build up a mask of those areas that you don't need to keep on looking at continuously, that fall inside or out of the definitions. And obviously then there's the other issues around regrowth management and so forth in regular and mulga country. That's probably the most challenging we've got to look at. But you do not ever want to be blindly taking data from the EU Observatory, which is looking at change, and then rating a property against it, because it could be the property next door, or it might not even be forest.
Thanks, Phil. Question, I might start with you, Elizabeth, if I may, just in terms of, I guess, your approach. There's a question around the risk analysis around sharing of lifetime traceability of a PIC. You mentioned data privacy, obviously, some of the key enablers of actually being able to share that kind of data, but what's your view from a risk perspective around the sharing of LT related to PICs?
Sharing it with importers or the European Union?
Well, I'm going to assume the question is about sharing it with anybody over and above the one up, one down capability that we all have when we simply act as moving livestock up and down. So from a, there's the privacy perspective. Are there any other dimensions of risk associated with, if you like, sharing of that kind of data to whomever based on permissions to share or authority to access?
Also, under NLIS and LPA even, we don't talk about geolocations. It's not a data point that we, one, collect, nor two, have permission to disclose at this point in time. So I guess the risk is always, back on the person who's being kind of identified through that information about, who's going to have it and what they can do with it. So there's inherent risk in sharing any type of data that could potentially locate someone or indicate that they're a status of some sort of another. So that risk is inherent, and I guess that's why NLIS has the restrictions on sharing that information that it does, because of that inherent risk that's built into it. So
thank you.
Just probably a question for me to add to that, Elizabeth. So what happens and what mechanism is available for a producer to give you the authority to share their data on their behalf?
Yeah, so within at this point in time we don't ask for that. So that would be a change piece that we'd need to build into, whether it's LPA or NLIS or both, in order to do that. So if we're sharing, say, a credential out of LPA and that's where the sort of source of the information is, you could build it into the LPA program as a disclosure point, or individually seek producers to approve that permission. So sort of down the line of what you've done with that that, that data sharing permissioning through the feed-based monitor.
Great, thank you. Just a quick check. We have no further questions posted on the Q&A chat. So look, thank you all to our presenters for your time and your perspectives. If you'd like to stay in touch with the progress of the initiative more broadly, and obviously the experimentation that you've heard from Simon and Phil moving forward, we do have a website. Oh, wrong finger. There it is up there. If you'd like to log in onto that website, you can register yourselves with an email address, and we'll keep you in touch with our regular newsletters. If you do have any specific questions that come to mind after this, please feel free to email us. Molly Rees-Jones, our inimitable and unsinkable project manager on this, can be contacted by email. And again, Molly's email address is just up there above my head. So please send any questions you have to us. Someone said the email address is too small. It's molly.reesjones, R-H-Y-S, Jones, or one word, at foodagility.com. That's Molly, M-O-L-L-Y .reesjones, R-H-Y-S-J-O-N-E-S, at foodagility.com. And of course, our website is www.AgTraceAus altogether. That's AgTraceAus, AUS.com.au. So thank you very much for your interest. Please stay in touch. And also, most importantly, if you do have any questions, reach out and we'll be happy to answer them. So enjoy the rest of your day.